The studio lights blazed as Jasmine Crockett entered the frame, her burgundy blazer immaculate against the backdrop of late-night television. Her natural curls were pulled back into a sleek low bun, and her black pumps clicked against the polished floor with purpose. She exchanged pleasantries with Jimmy Kimmel, settling into the guest chair with the poise of someone who belonged there, even if the space hadn't always welcomed voices like hers. Jimmy flashed his trademark grin, the one that had charmed audiences for years. "Ladies and gentlemen, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar late-night cadence. The powerhouse from Dallas, or as some folks call her, the human tornado of Capitol Hill. Jasmine's smile was polite but measured. "You can just call me Jasmine," she replied, her voice smooth as honey. "And I prefer to think of myself as precise rather than stormy." The audience chuckled, that automatic response of a crowd conditioned to laugh at the right moments. Jimmy launched into his usual routine, poking at the absurdities of Washington politics, the theatrical nature of congressional hearings, the endless drama that played out under the dome. Jasmine responded with practiced ease, deflecting his jabs with intelligence and returning a few pointed observations of her own. Then Jimmy reached for his prepared material, the moment when late-night interviews typically take their predictable turn. "So Jasmine," he said, leaning forward with theatrical curiosity, "you've got quite the reputation for being, how do I put this delicately, fiery. Is that intentional? Or do you just naturally combust when faced with nonsense?" A few audience members tittered. Jimmy pressed on, clearly pleased with his setup. "I mean, watching you sometimes, it's like Congress has its own reality show. Maybe we should call it The Real Representatives of Washington, D.C. The laughter came a bit louder this time, but there was something hollow about it. Jasmine reached for her glass of water, took a measured sip, and set it down with deliberate calm. "I'll answer that," she said, her tone unchanged. "But first, let me ask you something, Jimmy." Jimmy raised his eyebrows, sensing a shift, but not yet understanding its magnitude. "Sure, shoot. Do you ever wonder why passionate men in politics get called strong leaders while passionate women get called fiery?" The room went still. Not the stunned silence of a bombed joke, but something deeper. The kind of quiet that happens when someone says something true and uncomfortable in a space that wasn't prepared for truth. Jimmy blinked, his smile wavering for the first time since the interview began. For once, he didn't have a ready comeback. Jasmine didn't fill the silence. She simply sat there, patient and steady, letting her question hang in the air like smoke. "I dot." Jimmy started, then stopped. He laughed nervously, trying to recalibrate. "Well, I walked right into that one." "No," Jasmine said quietly. "You sprinted." The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Even Jimmy's nervous chuckle died in his throat. Something fundamental had shifted in the room, and everyone could feel it. This wasn't following the script anymore. Jimmy tapped his note cards against the desk, a nervous habit he'd developed over years of television. But this time, it wasn't just about buying time to think of the next joke. He looked genuinely unsettled, like someone who just realized he was in deeper water than he'd intended to wade into. "This interview just got a lot more interesting than my usual celebrity chef segments," he said, attempting to lighten the mood. Jasmine crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence was doing all the work. Jimmy tried to regain his footing. "You've been pretty vocal about, well, everything. Some people call you bold, others say you're angry. How would you describe yourself?" Jasmine looked directly at him. "Honest." Jimmy opened his mouth, but no words came. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The tension wasn't explosive or dramatic, but it was undeniable. Everyone in that room realized they were witnessing something unscripted, something real. "Well, honest is good," Jimmy said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to him. But you have been in some pretty heated exchanges, right? Do you ask Senator Collins that question? Jasmine replied without missing a beat. Or is being heated only problematic when it comes from a black woman? Jimmy's smile faltered completely. I think we might have a clip. Don't, Jasmine interrupted, her voice still calm as ever. Don't show clips of me losing my composure unless you're showing clips of everyone else doing the same. Otherwise, you're not telling the whole story. You're selling a narrative. Someone in the audience murmured approval. A few people actually clapped, though they stopped when they realized they were alone. Jimmy cleared his throat. Look, Jasmine, I wasn't trying to... I know you weren't, she said, her tone softening just slightly. But you did. And that's the thing about this whole system. I show up here as myself, unfiltered and authentic, and the first thing that happens is I get labeled. She leaned forward just enough for the camera to catch her full expression. When you use words like fiery, what you're really saying is that I don't behave like the people you're accustomed to seeing in this chair. But maybe that's not my problem to solve. Maybe it's yours. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier. Even the band, always ready with a musical sting or rim shot, stayed completely quiet. Jimmy looked down at his cards, nodding slowly, this time with genuine consideration. Fair point, he said finally. Jasmine leaned back. That's all I was hoping for. For several seconds, there was no laughter, no cue cards, no scripted banter. Just two people sitting across from each other in front of millions of viewers, having a moment that felt uncomfortably real. Jimmy wasn't ready to let the segment end on such a heavy note. All right, he said, summoning a grin that was working at about half power. Let's talk about something lighter. I heard you brought your dog to work, and he made headlines by relieving himself on federal property. The audience laughed, grateful for the release of tension. Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. He's got better judgment than some of my colleagues. That got a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from relief rather than obligation. But even as the mood shifted, the earlier moment hadn't disappeared. It hung in the air like an echo. Jimmy leaned on humor to navigate back to safer ground, but his rhythm was off. You could see he knew it too. Jasmine, meanwhile, looked completely composed, as if she'd been in situations like this her entire life, which, in many ways, she had. So, Jimmy said, shuffling to his next card, we've covered politics, you've educated me more than I bargained for, and I'm still recovering. But let's talk about your future. Congresswoman today, but what about tomorrow? Senate, White House, Netflix documentary series? The last part was meant as a joke. It landed awkwardly. Jasmine chuckled, but there was an edge to it. Funny thing about the future, she said. Everyone thinks they can write yours better than you can. Jimmy paused. Meaning? I mean, every time I step into a room like this, someone tries to finish my story before I've even started telling it. People love to skip to the ending when it's someone like me. Someone like you? Black, female, unafraid to speak my mind when it makes others uncomfortable, smart enough to make some people feel like they need to prove something. Another hush settled over the audience, natural this time, like they were trying to follow something that didn't come with a laugh track. Jimmy tried again. You've had several viral moments already. That exchange with the Oversight Committee, the press conference where you shut down that reporter from Houston. Do you want to be known this way? As someone who fights back? Jasmine leaned in, finally ready to deliver her closing argument. Jimmy, when you grow up being told you need to be twice as good to get half the recognition, and you still get talked about like you're twice as difficult, you learn to choose your words carefully. So if I give you one sentence that cuts through all the noise, believe me, it's not about going viral. It's about being heard. That sentence landed like a gavel. You could see Jimmy's eyes widen slightly, not in offense but in recognition. Like someone who'd just been told something they thought they understood but really hadn't. The audience didn't applaud immediately. They didn't need to. Everyone was watching her, and it wasn't just admiration. It was respect. "I'm not trying to become anyone's meme," she continued. "But if one clear statement can make people pause and think, even for a moment, then maybe I said what needed saying." Jimmy didn't respond right away. He turned his note card face down on the desk. "Well," he said, his voice quieter now, "you definitely said it." There was a beat, then someone in the back started clapping. Slowly, others joined. The applause built gradually, not a standing ovation, but substantial enough to change the entire energy of the room. Jimmy turned to the camera, breaking format slightly. "We'll be right back," he said, looking more thoughtful than he had 20 minutes earlier. As the screen faded to commercial, nobody moved for several seconds. Crew members whispered among themselves. A producer gestured frantically to someone with a headset. Jimmy sat quietly in his chair, replaying the conversation in his mind. Jasmine reached for her water again, calm and centered, as if she hadn't just turned a late-night talk show upside down with nothing but her words. When they returned from break, the atmosphere felt different, uncertain. The audience clapped on cue, but the energy wasn't the same. Some people looked like they weren't sure if they were watching entertainment or something else entirely. "We're back with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who just casually handed me my own show," Jimmy said, attempting to lighten things up. It was a decent line, delivered with practiced timing. Jasmine offered a diplomatic smile. "Just doing my civic duty." More laughter, this time with relief mixed in. But something had fundamentally changed between them. Jimmy sat straighter now, didn't lean in quite the same way. He wasn't intimidated, just more aware that he'd stumbled into something bigger than either of them had planned. They spent the remaining time discussing her work in Dallas, the legislation she'd been championing around mental health resources for underserved communities, her thoughts on building bridges across political divides. It was substantive without being confrontational, the kind of content that would be clipped and shared but wouldn't get anyone in trouble. Still, you could feel it underneath every exchange. The earlier moment kept echoing. You couldn't unhear what had been said. You couldn't pretend it hadn't shifted something fundamental. As they stood to shake hands for the goodbye, something unexpected happened. The audience rose. Not because they were told to, not following any cue from the stage manager. They just stood, one by one, some clapping, others simply showing respect. Jimmy seemed genuinely surprised by it. Jasmine looked almost amused. "Thank you," she said into her mic before walking off stage. The credits rolled over a wide shot of the audience still on their feet. The band played, but their music felt quieter somehow, like it didn't want to intrude on whatever had just taken place. Backstage, a different kind of energy was building. Producers huddled near monitors. A makeup artist kept checking her phone with wide eyes. A young intern whispered excitedly, "We're already trending." Jimmy stood near the playback monitor, watching the moment when she'd asked him about passionate women being called fiery. He wasn't talking, just staring. "Think I went too far?" he asked his executive producer. The producer took a moment before answering. "I think you encountered someone who's been fighting battles with dignity and intelligence her whole life, and she reminded you what that looks like." Jimmy sighed. "Yeah. And I was armed with joke cards." But while Jimmy processed what had happened inside that studio, the outside world was already reacting. Within 30 minutes, a shaky phone video from an audience member had hit social media with the caption, "She didn't even raise her voice. Jasmine Crockett just schooled Kimmel in real time." The post exploded. Within 2 hours, edited clips were circulating on every platform. A user called Politically Woke posted, "I've watched this 15 times. The way she said, 'Maybe that's your problem,' is going to live in my head forever." The comments were split between celebration and criticism. Some praised her composure and clarity. Others accused her of being divisive or playing the race card. But even the critics couldn't deny one thing. She had remained completely calm throughout, never raised her voice, never attacked anyone personally. She had simply asked questions and stated facts. By morning, it wasn't just political junkies talking. The clip had reached mainstream culture. Morning show hosts debated it. Radio DJs played the audio. Even entertainment podcasts were dissecting the moment. Major news outlets reached out to her team for follow-up interviews. Her communications director fielded calls from CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and others. When asked how to respond, Jasmine looked up from her phone and smiled. "We don't need to," she said. "I already said what I needed to say." That became its own headline. Jasmine Crockett on viral interview, "I already said what I needed to say." Support poured in from unexpected corners. Young activists praised her poise. Older viewers appreciated her respectful approach to making a point. Even celebrities chimed in, with several sharing the clip with simple captions like "this" and "truth." Jimmy's team eventually released a brief statement through a spokesperson. It wasn't quite an apology, but it acknowledged her point and expressed appreciation for honest, challenging conversations. Some called it insufficient. Others thought it was enough. But the real story wasn't about the viral moment or the headlines. It was about why that exchange mattered so much in the first place. Why a simple question about language and assumptions had resonated with so many people. The answer lay in Jasmine's journey long before she ever stepped onto that stage. Growing up in East Dallas, she was the kid who asked too many questions, the one teachers called challenging when she wondered why their textbooks never mentioned people who looked like her. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse. Her father ran a small mechanic shop. They taught her to stand up for herself, but more importantly, they taught her how to do it with dignity. In college, she majored in political science and worked multiple jobs to pay her way. She spent weekends in debate competitions, often facing opponents with more resources and connections. But she had something they didn't: the ability to stay calm under pressure and make her points with precision rather than volume. Law school sharpened those skills. Working as a public defender showed her how the system really worked, how justice often depended on who was speaking and how they sounded when they spoke. Every time she raised her voice in court, someone called her aggressive. Every time she showed passion, someone questioned her professionalism. Every time she stood firm, someone suggested she'd be more effective if she just smiled more. She kept mental notes of these moments, not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. She learned to recognize the coded language, the subtle ways people tried to diminish her without openly admitting what they were doing. So when Jimmy called her fiery, it wasn't about that single word. It was about a lifetime of similar moments. It was about the cumulative weight of being consistently characterized in ways that reduced her complexity to simple, digestible stereotypes. That's why her response carried such impact. She wasn't angry or defensive. She was surgical. She identified the problem, named it clearly, and offered a path forward. She didn't humiliate Jimmy or make him the villain. She simply held up a mirror and asked him to look. The audience respected that approach because it demonstrated something powerful. You can correct someone without destroying them. You can challenge assumptions without declaring war. You can speak truth without sacrificing grace. 3 days after the interview, something happened that didn't make headlines, but perhaps mattered more than all the viral clips combined. Jasmine was backstage at the same studio, not as a guest, but meeting with a producer about a media literacy initiative she'd been developing for schools in underserved communities. As she was leaving, she encountered Jimmy in the hallway. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he stepped forward. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey," she replied. "I've been thinking about what you said," he continued. "I think I got too comfortable. Forgot that being funny doesn't excuse being careless with how I talk about people. Jasmine nodded. It happens more than you might think. I know, he said, but I don't want to be part of that pattern anymore. She softened slightly. Then don't be. Jimmy exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. Thank you for not destroying me. Jasmine smiled. I don't destroy, I clarify. He laughed, genuinely this time. The hallway felt lighter. That small exchange wasn't captured on anyone's phone. It didn't trend on social media or get analyzed by pundits. But it mattered because real growth often happens away from cameras and applause. It happens when people meet each other as human beings rather than as performance partners. Later that week, Jasmine spoke at a high school in Phoenix. A student asked her how she stayed composed when people tried to diminish her. Her answer was simple but profound. You don't give them the power to define you, she said. And you remember that there's nothing more powerful than speaking your truth with grace. That line ended up on the school's website and in their newsletter. A teacher printed it out and posted it on her classroom wall. Maybe that's the real lesson from that night on television. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't require shouting. Sometimes it looks like knowing exactly who you are when someone tries to reduce you to a soundbite. Sometimes it means letting your words carry weight not because you're angry, but because you're right. Jasmine didn't win a debate that night. She didn't humiliate anyone or score political points. What she did was create space for herself and, by extension, for every person who's ever been mislabeled, dismissed, or underestimated based on how they look or sound, rather than what they have to say. In doing so, she reminded everyone watching that you don't have to shrink to be seen. You don't have to fight dirty to earn respect. Sometimes one well-chosen sentence, delivered with confidence and grace, can shift an entire conversation. And if that's not worth remembering, what is?